Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariana Gatto. I'm the Executive Director of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles. A special welcome to IAMLA members and supporters whose generosity makes programs like this possible. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to the members of the Italian Sons and Daughters of America joining us today, and thank the ISDA for its support in promoting this program. Our guest this afternoon is award-winning author and photographer Carla Gambescia. Carla's passion for Italy began early in her life. Her mother instilled in her a love for the Renaissance masters, while her father could frequently be heard discussing Italian geniuses of many callings. Carla has written about and toured all of Italy's 20 regions by foot, or on foot, I should say, and by bicycle. She co-founded the Giro del Gelato, a bicycle tour, which Outside Magazine named the best tour in Western Europe. In 2018, Carla combined her knowledge and love of Italian culture and her gift for writing to pen La Dolce Vita University, an unconventional guide to Italian culture from A to Z. The book was awarded the Silver Prize for Best Travel Book of the Year by the North American Travel Journalists Association. Carla is also the creative force behind the popular photo blog Postcards from the Boot, and a great friend of the IAMLA. Hi, Carla, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Really excited to be here. So
we're happy to have you. So this holiday season is unlike any other. And the more time we have at home, I kind of feel encourages a more of a thoughtful reflection about the holidays and holiday traditions. And we're so happy that you're joining us to share with us some of the origins of many of these traditions that we just kind of take for granted and we never really question where they came from. So tell us, enlighten us, guide us.
Okay, I'm thrilled to be here, and let me get started. Yes, so I think that, I want to begin my talk really addressing the central figure who represents the spirit of Christmas. Now, you all might be expecting me to say the baby Jesus, who I will get to in due course, but instead I'm going to begin with Santa Claus. And any kid will tell you that Santa Claus hails from the North Pole. However, Santa's historic journey is far longer and with more twists and turns than his annual one-night circumnavigation of the globe. The progenitor of today's modern-day Santa was born in the Eastern Mediterranean at the time of the Roman Empire, and his legend evolved across Northern Europe until assuming his now rotund man in red form on the shores of the New World. So, who is this ancestor of Santa? And how did Santa evolve to be such a jolly good fellow? And importantly, the bringer of Christmas presents. Well, Santa Claus, Sinterklaas in Dutch, or Santa Claus is actually a variation on Saint Nicholas of Bari, as in like Bari in Puglia. However, old Saint Nick is not Italiano, he's a Greek. And he's from ancient Myra, now in modern day Turkey, where he was a Christian bishop. And his feast day is December 6th, the day he was supposed to have died in 343 AD. So why is he Nicholas of Bari if he's really from, Greece or Turkey? Well, in 1087, the Barese mounted an expedition to find, or more accurately acquire, the mortal remains of the saint. Now, the technical term is furta sacra, and furta sacra means holy theft, which is the stealing or taking of relics, which was a really fairly common practice back in the day, because relics were thought to be like incredibly powerful and to confer certain divine protections on their locations, as well as conferring prestige. Now, the Venetians were also very keen on acquiring St. Nicholas's relics too, but the Barese got there first and brought him back to Bari, where his remains remain. His bones are today in his namesake cathedral. So now, how does St. Nicholas, now of Bari, become the central character in our celebration of Christmas? Well, it all has to do with his acts of extraordinary generosity and the very spirit that motivates giving to each other. Now, there are a lot of legends and miracles associated with St. Nicholas, but one of the most popular concerns a very poor family with 3 daughters and a widowed father, and the father is so poor that he can't provide dowries for his daughters. Now, this particular legend about St. Nicholas was really a very unusual story back in the day, because stories about saints were usually about like gory martyrdoms, you know, like flayings or roastings or beheadings and the like, or else saints would go out into the wilderness and they would like fast and meditate, like nothing festive, right? So this was a really different sort of story, and one that really captured the popular imagination. So the story goes like this. The poor father is despondent. He has no choice but to sell each of his beloved daughters into prostitution. But each time one came of age, a bag of gold miraculously would appear, and it was enough gold for each daughter to find a respectable husband. Kind of a Cinderella story times 3. Now, the anonymous donor was, of course, Nicholas, but this only was revealed later. Now, almost always in Christian imagery, in art, in prayer cards, St. Nicholas is often seen holding his staff, which is a bishop's crozier, and wearing like the triangular hat, a mitre, and usually holding 3 gold balls. And these balls were symbols of the gold for the 3 daughters. Now, the logistics of how he actually got them the gold and what gold, you know, what form the gold took is a matter of some debate. So sometimes when the story is depicted in art, you see Nicholas, he's tossing balls, or he's tossing coins, or he's tossing bags of gold, sometimes through a window, and then sometimes down the chimney. So you kind of get where this is going, right? So in the down the chimney version, the girls had been drying their stockings out, and remarkably, the gold ends up in their stockings. So this is the origin of our tradition of hanging, you know, stockings by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas, you know, and we know the rest. But of course, the big idea here was the concept of generosity and goodwill toward others, even those that you don't know. Now, during the Middle Ages, St. Nicholas's feast day, December 6th, began to be celebrated, and to commemorate his generosity, small gifts were given often to children. So it was an early version of what we would call Christmas today. But so why is St. Nicholas now associated with December 25th? How did we get from December 6th to December 25th? Now, this brings me to like Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. Now, Martin Luther, he sought to eliminate what he considered the church's like distracting obsession with saints and their worship. And he decided to transfer this tradition of giving gifts from St. Nicholas's feast day on the 6th to Christmas on the 25th, to keep the focus on Jesus as the bringer of light and salvation. And honestly, I think like Martin Luther really didn't like the gift thing either, you know, didn't like that. But for Luther, you know, I think it was fine, just move it to the 25th to eliminate this gift giving, which was very popular with the people, probably would have been a bridge too far. So now it's the baby Jesus who's the bringer of joy and gifts. But even little children understand that a baby could not possibly deliver all those presents. So the baby Jesus needed a helper. And this is how St. Nicholas ends up being, better known by his German name, Santa Claus, than his Italian name, San Nicola. And, as you can see from St. Nicholas's depictions in art, he doesn't look like anything like our Santa Claus. So it seems like he was this probably very skinny guy with a narrow face. So how did we get from the Santa of our collective imagination on the right, from the St. Nicholas on the left? Which brings me to New York, upstate New York, Troy to be exact, in the year 1823, when a truly magical poem, originally entitled A Visit from St. Nicholas, and now better known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, was first published on December 23rd, 1823 in the newspaper, the Troy Sentinel. Now there's some debate on who really wrote this poem, but our image of Santa was really born in this poem. And St. Nicholas is described as being chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and we know the rest by heart, with a round little belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. But, the poem describes him as a little guy, as an elf, with a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. And we probably forgot about the elf part, but we all know the reindeer by heart, minus Rudolph, he came later, on Dasher, on Dancer, on Prancer, on Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, and Blitzen. And actually, those names mean thunder and lightning, Donner and Blitzen, and that comes from Dutch. Yeah, so anyway, how does Santa, become so paternalistic, Father Christmas, Buon Natale, how did he get big? And it wasn't magical Zoltar. The Santa Claus of our collective imagination became visually iconic by none other than the power of advertising, and a company founded in Atlanta, happened to be founded in 1886, the Coca-Cola Company, which during the Depression and World War II created and appropriated this image of Saint Nick as their celebrity spokesperson. It was a really great choice. They got him for no money. He waived all residuals. And these vintage Coke ads are really quite collectible, and they go for a small fortune today. Now, there's one important fact that I neglected to mention. The original St. Nicholas of the 4th century was a bishop, and that's key for another tradition, which is the candy cane, which is a symbol we associate with Christmas. And the shape of the candy cane, with its rounded hook on the top, is like the curved crozier or staff that we associate with bishops. So much of today's symbolism was first born out of the legends of St. Nicholas and, the gift giving and being generous. And then in the Middle Ages, commemorating this idea of generosity, first on St. Nicholas Day, then transferring it because of the Reformation to December 25th. And so that's how we get there. So now I want to get to the baby Jesus, since the name of the holiday is Christmas. And its root, of course, refers to Jesus Christ, and Mass refers to Messiah, King of the Jews. Okay, so, it's a holiday where we're celebrating the birth of the Savior. However, the date, December 25th, doesn't really jive, with what astrologers and the star in the east would suggest. And based on the description of what we have and astrological facts, it's much more likely that Jesus was born sometime in the spring. So how did we get to December 25th? Well, it just so happened that the ancient Romans celebrated a major festival around the winter solstice, and it was the biggest and most festive festival of the entire year. And it was known as Saturnalia, and people would wish each other, Io Saturnalia, like happy Saturnalia. And it was super important for the Romans because it marked the end of one agricultural cycle and the beginning of another. And it was like a multi-day affair, kind of a week long around the solstice. So it began 3 or 4 days before and went 3 or 4 days after, like basically December 17th to December 23rd. And then it was followed, this is so cool, by another 2-day celebration, celebrating the sun god's Sol, and it was known as Sol Invictus. And that refers to the unconquerable sun, as in S-U-N, like what a coincidence, what a convergence, but actually there's a word for this, which is, the word is called syncretism. And it's a concept that kind of refers to the merging of different beliefs and customs and traditions that often happens during transitional periods in history. And this is, pretty much what happened, because the Emperor Constantine, he was the first Roman, Christian Roman emperor, and he made Christianity the religion of the empire. And that was in 312 AD. And the church fathers only first recognized Christ's date of birth as December 25th, 20 years after that. And that was in 336 AD, which, all of this then conveniently coincided with the celebrations of Saturnalia and Sol Invictus. So sort of superimposing the birth of Jesus, Son of God, with the major pagan holiday, celebrating the return of the sun. So this way the Christians had something to celebrate too, and making the transition to Christianity much easier, because everybody was kind of keeping the celebrations that they love at the same time. So now I want to share a little bit about Saturnalia with you, because many of its customs bear an uncanny resemblance to some of our own. Okay, so just Saturn first, he was like a big daddy of a deity. Like he was the Roman equivalent of the Greek god Cronus. And Cronus is the god of time, the father of Zeus, and Saturn was the father of Jove. And so the big daddy of them all. And he's god of the cycles of time and the season, and therefore agriculture and renewal. So he's a really major, right? And then astrologically, Saturn rules the constellation of Capricorn, and the sun enters Capricorn each year beginning at the time of the solstice, the end of one agricultural cycle, the beginning of the next. So Saturnalia in ancient Rome, I want you to imagine a combination of Christmas, New Year's, and Mardi Gras all rolled into one. So that was Saturnalia. So, there's a Mardi Gras king, they'd have like a Saturnalia king, and then they had candles. Candles were a really, really big thing. The giving of candles, to break the darkness and to recognize that light and the sun would be returning soon. And candles were lit throughout the ancient city of Rome. And Rome is really, our tradition is born, one that we keep very much alive today, Christmas lights. And one thing I feel like in America, we get a little carried away, a lot of like colors, rainbow blinking, a lot of crazy stuff. And in Italy, for the most part, it's more refined. And so I like this. This is an image from Florence. Here's another image. It's more like white lights, really, really nice. The other thing is Romans also decorated with holly and evergreens, and this is, again, renewal and, life eternal, all of these things. And believe it or not, they gave presents to, usually on December 18th or 19th, and sometimes in museums, you'll see these little antiquities, these little carved objects. And this would be something they might give a child. And then men would wear party hats. Okay, and actually these were at Saturnalia. And these were caps that actually freed slaves would wear, and they were known as cap of freedom. But this cap of freedom was also kind of emblematic of a particular custom that we haven't taken into account in our Christmas, which was this custom of role reversals. So one day each year, the masters were the slaves and the slaves were the masters. So this kind of role reversal. They would, the servants would be served by the masters. Kids would be in charge also people kind of ran naked in the streets. So it was very bacchanalian. There was a lot of drunkenness and overeating, very common. And then I just wanted to point this out because, they didn't have table and chairs. So often you see like these depictions of like eating, someone peeling a grape, and like someone's lying down. Well, you would actually eat lying down with like a little tray table in front of you. So anyway, so lots of feasting. Now, so I want to kind of move to something, again, more pious. I keep promising the baby Jesus. Okay, so all of us, whether we're Christian or not, have a general idea about how the Christmas story unfolds. But what we don't realize is that the official Christmas story is really the amalgamation of passages of only 2 of the 4 Gospels, and the first being the Gospel of Matthew, which begins with this rather tedious listing of the ancestors of Jesus. It begins with so-and-so begets so-and-so begets so-and-so begets so-and-so, all the way back to linking Jesus to Abraham. And then you have Joseph, son of Jacob, husband of Mary, becoming the foster father of Jesus, since Mary is betrothed to Joseph. So Mary is promised to marry Joseph, but before they tie the knot, Joseph finds out that Mary's with child. And according to Matthew, Joseph decides that he's going to have the contract quietly annulled. Okay, but then Matthew tells us that an angel appears to Joseph in a dream and tells him that it's all good and that the Holy Spirit conceived the child and he should take Mary as his wife. So kind of like an annunciation for Joseph. And so this is how he was convinced that he should not bail on Mary, okay, even though she's already with child before they were married. And then Matthew tells us that Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea, which was under the reign of King Herod. And then foreseeing the birth of Jesus, astrologers journeyed from the east and stopped off in Jerusalem to ask for directions. And they actually asked the king. Okay, they asked King Herod. So where is the child who was born to be king of the Jews, they said, explaining that they had observed a rising star, his star, and they had come a long way to pay homage to him. So, like, no surprise, Herod's pretty perturbed to learn of the birth of another king because, he's the king, right? And this newborn king could pose a threat to his power. So he acts like kind of cool, he's paranoid, but he's like, he's just like, oh, okay, I don't know where the baby is, but when you discover where this baby is, could you please return and let me know where he is so I can go and pay homage to him, when, he's really being pretty crafty because he's hoping to get a fix on the location of the newborn king so he could, what. Okay, so anyway, back to the Magi. They follow the star. They find Jesus and they arrive at the place where the baby was born. And it's not a manger. In fact, Matthew uses the word house. And this is where the Magi find the baby Jesus and Mary. And, the 3 kings, they're very much, we 3 kings of Orient are. So Magi actually is the plural of magnus, which means magician. Okay, but not in a Harry Potter sort of way. Magi refers to these men as being very scholarly, very learned men, and astrologers who could actually read the position of the stars and divinize the future. So the idea here is that you have these very important wise men journey from all corners of the earth to bow down to the ground, to pay homage to Jesus, and each brings distinctive gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so this is from the Chapel of the Magi in Florence, the different kings. Each of the kings have names and particular gifts that there's symbolism with each of the gifts. So this is Gaspar, who's an Indian scholar, and he brings gold. And the gold symbolizes royalty since Jesus was king of the Jews. And then our second king is Melchior, and he's from Persia, and he brings frankincense for his gift, and we associate divinity with frankincense. And then the third wise man is Balthazar, who's a Babylonian scholar and king. And his gift is myrrh, a very rare ointment used to anoint the dead before burial, really like foreshadowing that Jesus is predestined to die for us. So we have these three gifts. That's Balthazar, sorry. Who all the gifts are extraordinarily expensive, brought to the baby Jesus. But the kings are actually only mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew. Anyway, so now what? Okay, so then Matthew tells us that the three kings have a collective dream, and they're told not to inform Herod of the newborn's location. They should like bypass Jerusalem, go home another way. And so they do. And then sometime after this, another angel appears in another dream to Joseph and warns him that he better get like the family out of Dodge. Okay, get him to Egypt right away, because you got to get out of Bethlehem ASAP, because Herod is going to search for your son and he could kill him. So this prompts the flight into Egypt, when Joseph takes the Holy Family to Egypt, where they remain until Herod's death. Okay, so now Herod, he's been waiting for the astrologers to return, and then he finally figures out they're like probably never coming back. So then he resorts to ordering the massacre of all children under the age of 2 in Bethlehem and the surrounding vicinity. So this, of course, is the infamous massacre of the innocents, Herod's paranoid, crazed attempt to eliminate the potential threat of this newborn destined to be king of the Jews baby. So anyway, our story picks up again after Herod dies, and an angel appears to Joseph in another dream and tells him that it's safe to return home to Israel. So this is when the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, settle down in the town of Nazareth in the region of Galilee, and the rest, as they say, of course, is history. So that's the end of Matthew's Christmas story. But what about the second gospel? What about Mark? So there's really like nothing from Mark at all, and it really just begins with the baptism of Jesus by Saint John the Baptist. So he's already grown by that point. So no mention of Jesus's birth or early childhood. And so then the good news is that Luke largely corroborates Matthew and also gives us further information regarding Jesus's birth, and then fills in some important gaps. Okay, so he begins with the story of Zacharias and Elizabeth. Now, they're the parents of Saint John the Baptist, who's Jesus's cousin, and John's mother is Elizabeth, Mary's much older cousin. Okay, and Elizabeth is age 60, and we find out that Elizabeth miraculously is in her 6th month of pregnancy with John. And then Mary receives the visit from the angel Gabriel, who tells her she's about to have a child. This, of course, is the Annunciation. And now we finally find out how Mary conceived Jesus. And this has been a subject and an image that would be reproduced, time and time again in Christian art. And here's where the famous dialogue takes place. Ave Maria, Hail Mary, gratia plena, full of grace, Dominus tectum, the Lord is with thee. So the Virgin Mary, she's not really able to process this information, this news she's going to have a child, because she's still a virgin. And Gabriel tries to allay her fears and console her and says, do not be afraid, for God has been gracious to you, and you shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall give him the name Jesus. And then she responds, thy will be done. So Mary then goes on to share the news with her cousin Elizabeth. And this is when she discovers Elizabeth is also pregnant. And Elizabeth then greets Mary with the words also immortalized in the Hail Mary. Elizabeth says, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, of course, referring to Jesus. in Mary's womb. So this kicks off the whole thing, gets the story going, important parts of the story that we get only from Luke. So Luke also fills in some gaps left by Matthew. He tells us that there was a decree by the Emperor Augustus to conduct a census throughout the entire Roman world, which is why Mary and Joseph are headed to Bethlehem, the city of David. Historically, it's unlikely that there was a census. And if there had been, it wouldn't really have been that time of year. But it's important to get everybody to Bethlehem in order to fulfill the prophecy that the Messiah would be born of the lineage of David. So they had to get to the city of David, the city of Bethlehem. So Mary gives birth to Jesus and she wraps him in swaddling clothes. And so, you know, the song, Away in a Manger, there's, you know, no room in the inn or the house. But anyway, it's only in the Gospel of Luke that we learn that Christ is born in a manger and in the mangiatoio in Italian. And that refers to a barn and a place where animals mangiare. So it's where the animals eat. So that's where we get the manger. Anyway, and then an angel appears to the shepherds and announce glory to God in the highest and peace to his people on earth. And so then the shepherds hastily make way and we have the adoration of the shepherds. They come to behold the newborn king. So the Gospel of Matthew gives us this kind of grandness and pageantry of the Magi who have traveled a long, long way, whereas with Luke, we get a much more humble, simple, rustic, intimate nativity, a barn, you know, and we just have local shepherds who come to adore him. So that essentially ends the nativity story with Luke. The next episode of Luke is the circumcision, because Jesus is Jewish, of course, and he's brought to the temple, and there he was named Jesus, as Gabriel had instructed Mary to do. And now everything according to Jewish law is fulfilled, and they return to Nazareth in Galilee. And in Luke, we have no mention of Herod or the massacre of the innocents, you know, just fulfilling Jewish law. And then Luke says, Jesus, quote, grew up to be big and strong and a wise man, and God's favor was clearly upon him. So just in case you're wondering, what about John and the Gospel of John? Did he say anything about the baby Jesus? Well, the Gospel of John, according to John, is really very like unique among the Gospels. It's more metaphysical, it's more abstract. And it begins with, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God. So nothing about Jesus's childhood or infancy. And, you know, it's interesting, like when I put like, this isn't my nativity set, but when I still have like the nativity set of my childhood. And when I put that together every year and put it out, I'm always reminded that like we've pieced together this dramatic, extraordinary story about the Holy Family making their way to Bethlehem. And we have this cast of characters, you know, my figurines, and they've been piecemealed together from different biblical sources. But I want to talk a little bit more about the tradition of the Christmas, the manger, the creche, and manger scenes, which are really ubiquitous during the holidays. And when I was growing up, actually, we wouldn't add the baby Jesus until after we got back from midnight mass. But our collective tradition of the annual creche began 800 years ago, thanks to St. Francis of Assisi. And it began as a live reenactment of the Christmas story on Christmas Eve in a tiny Tuscan town named Greccio. This is where Francis was living at the time. Now, no saint is more closely associated with the beauty and simplicity of the natural world than St. Francis. And he was also a great reformer, a man of the people. He founded the Franciscan order, which was really all about voluntary simplicity And, he's very anti-materialism. He's probably turning in his grave for like what Christmas has become. But anyway, his motivation for staging this first reenactment of the Nativity was to really help ordinary people get engaged emotionally and to with the Nativity, and to gain a renewed sense of wonder about the miracle of the first Christmas. So up until Francis's first live creche, people, would normally go to, to church on Christmas, and priests would tell the Christmas story, but they tell it in Latin, which, was a language ordinary folks didn't speak or even understand. So Francis decided what he wanted to do was make the extraordinary experience of the first Christmas accessible for ordinary people by literally bringing it to life for the people. And so Francis sought the Pope's permission, which he received, and asked a friend to loan him some animals and some straw to set up a manger scene to represent Jesus's birth in Bethlehem. And so he set up this scene in a cave just outside the town of Greccio. And there was a wax figure for the baby Jesus, and then costume people in the roles of Mary and Joseph, a live donkey, and an ox, which his friend had loaned him. And that evening, local shepherds watched over their sheep in the nearby fields, just as shepherds had, according to Luke, in Bethlehem on the first Christmas Eve, as they had so many years ago, when the sky filled with light and an angel announced the birth of the baby Jesus. So during the Mass, Francis told the Christmas story based on Luke, and delivered the sermon in the local dialect. And in his biography of St. Francis, St. Bonaventure described what happened that night, and I'm going to quote here. The brethren were summoned, and the forest resounded with their voices, and the night was made glorious by many and brilliant lights, and the sonorous psalms of praise. Francis stood before the manger, full of devotion and piety, bathed in tears and radiant with joy. Then he preached to the people around the nativity of the baby Jesus, and being unable to say his name for the tenderness of his love, he called him the Babe of Bethlehem. So this first nativity scene reenactment proved so popular that towns across the area began to set up live nativities to celebrate Christmases, and did so in the years that followed. And Christians now and everywhere celebrate live nativity plays and set up nativity scenes made of statues of all sizes and materials in town squares, churches, and homes. And I can remember the excitement in my family when my older cousin Mark was cast as like the little drummer boy in his school's pageant. So of course today we feature a much larger cast of characters than Francis featured in his original, drummer boy, shepherds, angels, the magi, a menagerie of animals, and even more, as we shall see. Which brings me to Naples. But before we go to Naples, just 2 Christmases ago, Pope Francis made his way to that little chapel in the cave outside of Greccio, and you can visit there as well. So now let's go to Naples, and so you can be strolling down, this is known as Christmas Alley, via San Gregorio Armeno in Venice's old city. And it doesn't really matter what time of year you go down there, because there are artisans busily at work creating creche figurines and proudly displaying their "not made in China" signs. And this is because Naples is the Presepio capital of the world. And it's been so for the past 300 years. And it's kind of interesting, in the 1700s, these creche figures and like setting up a massive creche was an obsession in Naples among wealthy families who competed to create the most impressive creche scenes. And yeah, here are some figurines, you know, and they all have finely painted terracotta heads, arms and legs carved from wood, bodies that are filled with hemp and shaped with wire. And here's some figurines from a store, really nice store. Also, these glorious Baroque paper mache angels are part of all of this. And then you'll notice here some characters that have like nothing to do with nativity. We have a chef with a spaghetti pot, and we have a fruit vendor. Well, these types of figures are very typical of a Neapolitan style creche. And in my opinion, they're totally in the spirit of St. Francis, this idea of featuring colorful local peasants going back about their quotidian tasks. You know, these secular figures, which are a very important part of the Neapolitan creche, are known as the pastori, and they're kind of my favorite. There's an endless variety of them. And the traditional nativity figures are known as the presepi, and the common people are the pastori. Here's a store with more pastori. You see the fruit vendors and so on. And so King Charles of Spain, who ruled between 1734 and 1769, owned a spectacular creche with nearly 6,000 figurines. Now, this isn't his. This is a creche that has about 1/3 as many figures, and you can see this in the convent of San Martino in Naples. Anyway, he was ruling Naples and Sicily for about 50 years. Anyway, his creche was broken up and sold in pieces, and these high quality figurines occasionally like end up on antique markets. But anyway, in the convent of San Martino, there's like a whole room of different, you know, presepio. And I wanted to show you this one. I really like this one with the Baroque, the choir of angels going up into the sky, and then you see the nativity. But I want to bring you close up on the pastori, which you can see this neighborhood. It's a veritable village, and check out like the links of sausage and the little dogs. And here's another presepio. You can see in Naples in the church of Santa Chiara. Now you'll notice they're Roman ruins, which are also very typical in scenes, in these creche scenes. And that seems like a non sequitur, right? But anyway, the reason that you often have these Roman ruins, and they're actually traditional with Neapolitan creche, is that King Charles funded most of these early excavations that went on in Pompeii. So it was really like very exciting, all, you know, the discovery of all this Roman antiquity. And so that's why they're very much a part of these creche scenes. And then this is a creche that you can see in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's probably the finest in the United States. It has 200 figures in its creche and these Baroque angels. There's also a really marvelous one in the Carnegie Mellon Museum just outside of Pittsburgh. So at the Met, the Neapolitan creche is in the Baroque, in the medieval courtyard, and it stays up until the Feast of the Epiphany, which is January 6th, which is the 12th day of Christmas. And the 12th day of Christmas marks the arrival of the three wise men with their finest gifts for the newborn king. And actually, the Epiphany is really the big day in the Eastern Church. And, you know, it's celebrated in Italy, and it's also a national holiday. And in Italy, they'll celebrate the Epiphany with Epiphany Day parades. Here's one in Florence. And what the Epiphany actually, the word means manifestation. And what it represents, at least in the Eastern Orthodox Church, is the arrival of the Magi was this manifestation, or, you know, proof positive that Jesus was, born and meant to be the king. And so in this parade that you see, you'll see it in different cities. This is Florence. The kings bring their gifts to the Duomo. And then also Epiphany marks the arrival of the Befana, which is, another like say what, the Christmas witch, which is a completely original and unique Italian tradition. And it's kind of fun because the good children get sweets, and if you're bad, you get coal. Okay, so that's kind of fun. And this, you have to consider that in Italy, up until fairly recently, gifts were given on the Epiphany, and they weren't like really big gifts. They were things you would eat, things you would consume, like specialty foods, dessert treats, that kind of thing. And that's why there are like so many regional specialties throughout Italy. It was what you would give on the Epiphany. And so the 12th day of Christmas, so that's the Befana. And really, the Santa Claus is more of a Northern European custom that was exported to the New World and North America. But of course, with globalization, the entire Christian world and the non-Christian world for that matter, all celebrate this tradition of giving gifts on December 25th. Now, I want to conclude with just a few words about New Year's and New Year's Eve. And I haven't really talked about food and all their yummy local variations and traditions. But regardless of where you are in Italy, on New Year's Eve, the tradition is that you should eat sausages for the richness of life, and they be accompanied by lentils, because lentils are symbolize wealth and good fortune, like they're little coins. And then you eat grapes for husbandry, sometimes 12 grapes for the 12 days of Christmas. But anyway, the idea here is don't blow your wad at once, a little at a time. And grapes are like the perfect like fruit for portion control. And then in the South, you play tombola, which is like bingo Italian style. And then also there's a tradition, I've not been to Naples, I can't vouch for this, which is to throw bang pots and pans, but throw maybe a plate, break plates on New Year's Eve, or toss plate out the window. And I owned a restaurant for nearly a decade, and it was Italian naturally. And every New Year's Eve, we would have Neapolitan plate tossing, and people loved it. Like, it was so popular. We did it like for like 3 days leading up to New Year's, plus New Year's Eve. And I bought a, like at Home Depot, like a window frame that I put on the bar, and I had paper plates, and people would write down what they wanted to get rid of, COVID-19, whatever, negativity, all these things. And you would write it on the plate, and people would toss it like a Frisbee out the window. It was super popular. And yeah, so we have like a lot of stuff we want to throw out this year. I think we all do. And so anyway, so if you're in Naples, watch out for flying plates. And whatever you do, don't forget to wear red underwear for luck, love, and passion in the upcoming new year. And at the stroke of midnight, lots of fireworks everywhere. And I just, so yeah, so I want to just conclude this with something. I found this, I was searching for something else for a different presentation. I was doing some research, and I happened to find this amazing picture of a cover of Life magazine. And I want you to notice the date there, December 24th, 1945. And this is the Magi from the Chapel of the Magi, Magi Chapel in Florence. And so this was the first Christmas after the end of World War I. And this was the cover, okay? And Italy had been, an enemy. But at the same time, so many Italian Americans had bravely fought for their new beloved country. And I really think that this being the cover of Life magazine really speaks to this incredible bond between Italy and America that has existed for a very, very long time, and the connection that we all share. So with that, I'll conclude my talk. I'm happy to take questions, and I really hope I made you happy.
Oh,
And,
absolutely, absolutely. I think judging by the interactions with our viewers, there is quite a bit of interest in everything that you've covered, and I think you know, there's certainly, you know, we could continue this presentation for a couple more hours and then still only be scratching the surface. But so we've received quite a few questions,
oh,
and
cool.
I'd like to just kind of jump right in. The first one is, where does the tradition of the Christmas tree originate?
Okay, so that really comes from Northern Europe,
Mm.
and also Druid tradition. So really things that are you know, and again, this is a very interesting example of that syncretism, because the Druids and Celtic culture would also very much celebrate the solstice and all of the activities around the solstice. So this would be like the paganism of the Celtic tradition that was melding with Christmas tradition in the north. So that would be to decorate the evergreen, and so that's where the Christmas tree comes from. So it's really that syncretism in Northern Europe.
Mm. And the next question was, well, so is there like kind of a story behind how the Christmas tree became so popular, how it, you know, was adopted so widely?
Well, okay, so pretty much when we had the Protestants, Northern Europeans who came first to the New World, they were doing, you know, the Santa Claus, that you know, that whole thing, which was Saint Nicholas on the 25th, and the Christmas tree from you know, the Northern Europe, you know, Europe. But it's also interesting that there were some like Puritans, they were like ixnay on Christmas. They did not recognize Christmas at all, but it was much more, you know, the Protestants, not Puritans, that brought Christmas here. And so that's really where all of that came from. But we did have the Puritans who were like, oh, nothing, no Christmas. They weren't any fun, really. So, yeah.
Now, there's quite a bit of interest in the Magi as well. So we received a question. What was the star in the east that the Magi were following?
Okay,
Was it a real astrological event?
okay, so there was, and people have kind of gone back to how things, the movement of the stars. And so it wasn't really, it seems that it wasn't really a star, okay, but that it was like three planets were aligned together at dawn for a period of time. So there was this alignment of the planets who's, you know, because the planets are really bright. And so when you have these three planets and they're bigger than the sun, so they're big and they're aligned together and they're, you know, in a conjunction, and they're happening at dawn. And this went on for a little while. And so it's been sort of postulated that that could be what, you know, the star would have, you know, referred to. And so there was this event that was, you know, in the sky. I mean, some people have speculated that it was like a comet. There were things like that. But at least in terms of what I've read, this conjunction of planets at dawn for a period of time seems really like that would be very bright. Yeah.
One of our next questions involves the feast of Santa Lucia, which is coming up on the 13th. So now this question kind of came in parts, so I'm going to try to put it together as I imagine the person is asking. So the Feast of Santa Lucia, or Saint Lucy, is celebrated as, very popular in the Scandinavian world as well as Italy. How did Santa Lucia's popularity spread?
Well, I'm aware of that. I want to talk about Lucia for a moment because she's super, like, they love her in Sicily. She's and I mean, so she was one of those early Christian martyrs, and you always like her symbol in art. You'll see her with two eyes, okay, and the story is something like, there was a pagan who was a pagan man who she was betrothed to, but she didn't want to marry him, and to deter him from being interested in her, she plucked out her eyes and sent them to him. And then he converted to Christianity, and she was healed, and she's the patron saint of eyesight. And her feast day is in December. And so again, there's this connection between light and sight, and the Feast of Lights and the Feast of Santa Lucia. And so I do think that that explains, because again, her feast day and light, very much like Saint Nicholas, the 6th, and again, the syncretism and so on, that there was this connection. And she was, there were Christians, in the north, and there were barbarian Christians, and so her story would have been spread that way. But I think it's a very similar to a Saint Nicholas kind of connection. And I also wanted to mention that the Immaculate Conception, which we just passed, that was which often is when, I don't know how things work right now, but normally, like in Italy, they wouldn't really start like decorating. Everyone like starts decorating like in, so early nowadays. But normally the season was marked by the beginning of the season with December 8th, the Immaculate Conception. And the Immaculate Conception, I was always confused by this because like I only went to like catechism. I didn't go to Catholic school, so I didn't have all my details. So I was always like, the Immaculate Conception, like, really? It's like, just like 2 weeks before Christmas or 3 weeks before Christmas. But the Immaculate Conception actually refers to the conception of Mary. And that date was when the Catholic Church recognized the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, that Mary was conceived without sin. And it was recognized in the 1800s. And so that typically marks the beginning of the Christmas season in Italy.
And then we have another question about Santa. So this one viewer is asking, when did Santa's reindeer and sled enter the picture? Can that be traced to the 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, or did it predate?
Okay, so it's definitely in the poem. So the poem that was published in the Troy Sentinel, these lines that we know, that he laughed, and he laughed when his dimples, and the 8 tiny reindeer. So I mentioned that in the poem he was an elf, he was a little guy, and the actual language of the poem was a miniature sleigh with 8 tiny reindeer. So the reindeer are in the poem, just not Rudolph. And so, so the reindeer and the sleigh, that all comes into our collective consciousness with the poem. But again, he was little. And so it was a miniature, and he didn't get big until Coke.
That happens to a lot of people.
That's true.
But the reindeer, the flying reindeer, it's just anybody's guess.
Well, it was in the imagination of Clement Moore, or there's actually some debate about who actually wrote the poem. but that was all, you know, in the author of, you know, the poem.
Mhm.
So.
And then the next question, again, sometimes I have to interpret what viewers are trying to ask, but is there a connection between the lump of coal that the Befana gave naughty children and the lump of coal that Santa Claus is known to give naughty children, or is it just coincidental?
Well, I think in general, there are no coincidences. So, yeah, so I think that I don't know how long Bafana has been in the picture,
Mhm.
but I would just say there are no coincidences. I mean, I've read some things about the Bafana that she really, her story begins in Umbria, and there's some tale that the Magi actually, that she was trying to help out the Magi to get to find directions, and then she's been flying around. She was like a maid, and she was very tidy, and she's been in search of the Magi, and then they kind of connect on the Epiphany. They get together because she's looking for the Magi too. But again, I think you have all of this, you know, again, this overlap of these stories.
Mhm.
And I just think they're all, you know, we're all connected, and these stories are all connected. So,
Certainly. And I guess there's few things that could be worse to receive than coal, unless you're
right,
cold, of course.
right. Well, colon, well, or Santa's colon would if you're, you know, you're bad. But, you know, again, it's interesting that it's Italy. It was all like something sweet, a sweet
Mhm.
treat
Mhm.
was, you know, the gift.
Oranges and that
Yes.
sort of thing, yeah.
Right.
Um, Now, the questions again, they vary tremendously. So now we have a question about relics, and one of our viewers would like you to explain a little bit more about relics and what their importance in the early church.
Okay, so actually in my book, I have a very funny essay. It's called Relics Rest in Pieces. So basically, um, you know, when you have the relic, particularly bones, like there, you know, you can have things that are like slightly like one step removed, the clothing of a saint, but the bones of a saint uh, really confer protection. So whatever like that particular saint is associated with, I mean, part of the reason the Barre say they didn't necessarily go for him because of the story of uh, you know, the girls and their father. He also was known to have calmed storms. And so sailing people wanted him, which is why Venice was trying to get there too. They both, the Barres are sailing people. They're both, you know, ports of the Adriatic. So you would want a particular saint that has some power. And if that particular power is important to you, for example, so this is a crazy story of like a Furta Sacra. In Venice, there was Saint Rocco, okay, Saint Roch. He was a French saint from Montpellier, but he was known to be really good with plague, okay, and
Mhm.
that he was a healer. So the Venetians went and they got his bones even before he was canonized because they knew
Mhm.
that he was going to come in handy someday. And so, what this saint is associated with, if the saint is, you know, part of your community, it confers protections to you and your people. And it's very important that you pay homage to your saint. So with the Furta Sacra thing is that if people would go after these bones, but the idea was that the bones were in agreement. So the saint wouldn't let their bones be taken unless they wanted to go to the new location. You know, so there's a story about the bones of St. Mark's, the evangelist, when the Venetians went to get him, you know, and, you know, it was in a very threatened port of Alexandria. And, you know, the Venetians wanted an evangelist. That was like back in the day, if you have the bones of an evangelist, okay, that's like you're like a nuclear power, in those days. You're that powerful because like Rome has the primo, apostle Saint Peter, and then you get a powerful saint, and it makes you powerful and it makes you strong because you have the protections of that saint. And that was, it was kind of a line of defense, so anyway. Yeah.
Now, of course, there's lots of questions about food. I tried to kind of group these together so that we wouldn't be jumping around so much. But now, the first one involves the Feast of the Seven Fishes, which, I find it hilarious when I'm speaking with Italian American friends from different parts of Italy, especially ones who aren't, from the coastal Souths, namely Sicily, and they say the Feast of the Seven, what? So, here's this feast that has become so popular in the United States, but if you, depending on where you are in Italy, many people haven't heard of it. So tell us about the Feast of the Seven Fishes. Where does it come from? And do you prepare one each year?
No, but I do make bacalai. So anyway, yeah. So now
that we got that out of the way.
yes. And actually as a child, like I didn't eat anything, like nothing. I like bacalai. I was a very unusual, like strange child. But anyway, the Feast of the Seven Fishes, it's a very interesting thing. And I've done, so first of all, fish, like the day before a feast of, and then even during Lent. So the whole idea of fish, the sacrifice, carnivale is farewell to meat. So it has something to do with like fasting, although fish symbolically is very important to the Catholic Church. So Christ was a fisherman. Peter was named Simon, but his name was Simon, and he took the name Peter with, on my rock I build this church. Pietro is for Peter, for rock. So the fish thing is really a big thing in the Catholic Church, and the symbol of the fishes, the Pisces, which is, the age of Aquarius. We just had that 2,000 years ago. The birth of Christ saw the beginning of the age of the Pisces, which is a symbol of the fishes, which is what was, again, you have this kind of paganism, astrology, all of these symbologies come together in one place. So fish would be something you would do before a feast day, and is, of course, very traditional in the South. And so, we would always have bacalai, but the seven fishes thing, okay, so I've done like a lot of research on this. And at one point, when I had my restaurant, I was like, oh, maybe I'll do like a, Feast of the Seven Fishes. What are the seven fishes? All of these things. And what I discovered, now I'm from Philadelphia, so I kind of really like this like discovery, was that the first time Feast of the Seven Fishes is ever mentioned in print was an ad for a restaurant in Philadelphia in 1983, which was a promotional thing for a restaurant, a Christmas Eve dinner. So the best I can put together with this is fish is common on Christmas Eve. And it was just, the power of advertising and a good thing. And, you do fish, and many, especially in Southern places, it's not just one fish, but multiple fish. And seven is a great number because there's a lot of symbolism with seven sacraments, 7 days to create, 7 of the apostles were fishermen. There are a lot of reasons like that 7 makes sense. So, so that's really where that comes from.
7 days in a week.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there's all this stuff around 7. So if you're going to pick a number, that's a good number, so.
So the feast itself, you're finding that the first mention in the United States is in the 1980s.
Right.
But it's obviously very popular in Southern Italy, and especially Sicily, coastal Southern Italy.
Well,
before that,
having fish on Christmas Eve, of course, not necessarily having 7 fish.
7 or 13 for that matter.
Or 13, or whatever the number might be, but it's fish is something definitely that you might have on Christmas Eve, but the 7 thing is, you know, kind of a product of like another like marketing, you know, whatever. But anyway, yeah.
So the next question about food is, are there any holiday desserts or other culinary traditions that are shared across Italy's 20 regions?
Well, I would say panettone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you might have like, depending, like some people do like their strufoli or these different like little bow ties, different things like that. But panettone everywhere. And so I would do this in my restaurant. We would do panettone pound cake and we would grill it. And then we would put like we'd have the warm grilled pound cake and then we put gelato on top of it. It's really good.
And then the next question is, why strufoli why is strufoli so popular for Christmas?
Well, okay, I think that's a Southern thing. I'm not really sure, but you know, the little balls, you know, they have to be like a good size. You know, I wonder whether that has something to do like with the lentils, having to do with plenty or abundance, or, you know, for good fortune, or I don't know if that's the case, but I mean, that I think it's a good speculation. You know?
It's, you know, it's festive and it's maybe more decadent than perhaps you know, the average person was able to, you know, partake in on a daily basis.
I find it very frustrating to make them. They're so small. It's like, God, you know, it's like complicated. So yeah.
Well, Carla, thank you so much for this fantastic journey of discovery. We enjoyed it tremendously, and I know the questions continue to come in, but I think we're going to wrap for now, and we hope to welcome you back to the museum when things normalize a bit. And you know, the Zoom is great. We're certainly able to connect with much larger audiences on Facebook Live and that sort of thing. But we really look forward to welcoming you to the museum.
I can't wait to see you again and give you a hug.
Yes.
And then also one thing I wanted to share with you is, so when I told the nativity story and I picked all that artwork, I picked all Italian artists. And so I have the details of the paintings, who painted them and where they are. And I'll send them to you so that you can send them out to members or whatever. But anyway, so
wonderful, because we anticipate receiving a lot of questions about your talk after it concludes. And
okay,
that'll be fantastic.
And listen, I love you. I wish I was with
love you tons. I know, where life will return to normal one of these days before long. And you know, we look forward to doing so much more together. And I want to thank you also for your generous contribution to our silent auction. I don't know if
Yes. So, so what I would, please everyone, like, bid on this. So I do a special online trivia challenge. It's fun, questions and answers, all about Italian culture. So I'm doing a trivia night. So definitely bid on my trivia night and we'll have an amazing time together. It's so perfect on Zoom because it's great. So I hope you bid on it, people.
Well, thank you. Yes. So if you visit our Facebook page or our website, you can see the information about the silent auction, and just scroll through the catalog or type in Carla, and you'll find the online, you know, chat Zoom lecture that Carla is referring to. So in closing, we want to wish everybody a very, you know, happy holiday season, a Merry Christmas, Buon Natale. Stay safe, everyone. We're going to be returning on January 15th when our guests will be musicologist, ethnomusicologist, singer and percussionist Alessandra Belloni, who will be guiding us through the ancient Southern Italian tradition of the tarantella and the healing journeys of the Black Madonna. So Carla, thank you so much again. We send our love from Los Angeles across the continent, and you know, again, Buon Natale, thank you so much.
And Io Saturnalia too.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Ciao, ciao.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.